What is happening, everyone, and welcome to episode number 26 of the Brandon Mulholland podcast. And just kind of keeping the momentum of uploading these podcasts, I thought today I'd follow on from the Q&A and go back to kind of a book review. And the book I'm going to talk about today is The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's a Swiss author anyway, and this book is a popular self improvement book that explores common cognitive biases and mental mistakes that hinder our ability to make sound decisions and think clearly. I only finished this book like a couple of days ago, and I found it really insightful and actually did really enjoy the read. The breakdown of the book's key aspects involve kind of the focus, which it's kind of like 100 chapters, and each chapter is like 2 or 3 pages, so it's actually pretty easy to read, even though the book is like 300 pages. But it identifies over like there's 100 of these chapters of these thinking errors that we humans commonly fall prey to, and these include such as like confirmation biases, like favoring information that confirms our existing beliefs, the sunk cost fallacy, which I'll get into in a bit more detail later, but that's basically clinging to a losing, proposition of past investment, and another such example I'll get into later, such as the social proof trap, like which is being influenced by the opinions of others. It talks about the goal of the book aims to equip readers with the knowledge and tools to recognize these biases themselves and amongst other things. So by understanding how our brains can lead us astray, we can make more rational decisions and avoid falling victim to these mental shortcuts. And the style of the book, which I kind of briefly mentioned earlier on, it's written in a clear and concise way. Like The Art of Thinking Clearly uses real life examples and anecdotes to illustrate the concepts. So it's broken down to short and digestible chapters, 2 or 3 pages, and it's making it an easy read for anyone interested in improving their critical thinking skills. And overall, like, this book is a bestseller. Like, it's translated into 40 different languages. It's been praised for its kind of accessible approach to cognitive psychology, and it can be like a valuable resource for anyone looking to improve their problem solving skills, communicate more effectively with others, think more critically about information they encounter, and make better decisions in their personal and professional lives. And I definitely would say it's a valuable read for anyone who wants to understand how their mind works and learn to think more clearly. So yeah, as I touched on, the book's themes discuss cognitive biases, logical fallacies, mental models, and decision making. And the book basically aims to equip readers with the skills they need to think more clearly, make better decisions, and avoid common pitfalls in reasoning. So the cognitive bias, this basically talks about how the book delves into various cognitive biases, which are mental shortcuts that can lead to errors in reasoning. So, for example, an example including confirmation bias, seeking information that confirms our existing beliefs, and sunk cost fallacy, which I discussed earlier on, which is cling on to like losing course of action of past investment. He also explains the common logical fallacies, which are errors in reasoning that can lead to unsound conclusions. Like, an example would be like the slippery slope fallacy, which assumes like a small step will lead to a disastrous outcome. The mental models, where he explores the concept of the frameworks we use to understand the world. So by recognizing these mental models and their limitations, we can improve our ability to think critically. Sorry, I can't even talk today. My voice is so dry. I don't know what. My mouth is so dry. I don't know what. I think I've just been talking for the last week, and I'm just a bit. I think it's kind of catching up to me now. But no, look, we'll push on. And decision making. So the author, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but Rolf provides practical strategies for making better decisions. So this includes techniques for avoiding emotional decision making, like considering different perspectives and think outside the box. Really, he basically there's a point that he makes in the book, and he talks about how he thinks with his feelings and not with his thoughts, and that's kind of what he's trying to get at with the book. So if I were to do like a strengths and weaknesses of the book or pros and cons, um, like the book for one, like one pro I have is the book is very clear and has very engaging writing. So he uses concise language and relatable anecdotes, like making the book enjoyable to read, even like for people who don't have a background in psychology or logic or kind of very new to reading. Another pro I'd have is he focuses on the actionable advice. So the book doesn't just identify cognitive biases; it offers concrete strategies for overcoming them. He would provide practical tips for questioning assumptions, avoiding emotional thinking, and considering different perspectives. And then one more pro I'd have of the book is he he uses entertaining examples. So to understand kind of the content that he's kind of providing or like the words he's saying, he uses real world examples to basically make you understand of his kind of reasonings even more. So he uses historical anecdotes, like even using pop culture references to illustrate his points, making the book more engaging and memorable. And the last pro I'd have in the book is that there's a wide range of biases covered. So the book explores a diverse set of cognitive biases, giving readers a well-rounded understanding of how our thinking can be skewed. And then with the cons, like I'm even being a bit nitpicky here, and I wouldn't even say there's that many, but I would say one of the cons would be there's a limited focus on overcoming emotional biases. So while the book like would acknowledge the role of emotions in decision making, it could probably offer more practical strategies for managing emotional responses during critical thinking processes. And another con I'd have would be um the given the vast number of biases covered, like the book can feel a collection of bite-sized insights at times, and some readers might prefer a more in-depth exploration of specific biases. But again, that's just kind of me being nitpicky. So yeah, overall, the target audience would be well suited for a general audience with no prior knowledge of psychology or logic. It is a great starting point for anyone interested in improving their critical thinking skills. And if I had to compare it to a book that I read, I actually didn't like this book personally, but I think it was very much like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Um, while that book is a more of an in depth exploration of cognitive biases, it's a very dense read, and that's kind of what I didn't like about it. It was a bit too complicated and complex for me to read. But the article clearly offers a more concise and accessible approach to the biases that you might have got from that other book. So yeah, um, basically there's a few kind of like cognitive biases that he talks about, and like while I'm kind of doing this review, while I can't capture every nuance of the book, a few things that I kind of like noted down or kind of saved in my head or wrote down just on the book or highlighted. It's a few biases that he discusses along with some of the insights he offers. So the first one that I everybody probably knows of, well, kind of don't doesn't really think of, but you kind of experience it probably almost pretty regularly. It's called it's called, and I mentioned it at the start of the podcast as well, but it's called or the episode. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. So this bias essentially describes our tendency to cling to losing courses of action simply because we've already invested time, money, or effort into them. So the author in this case is the example of attending a boring movie, like or going to the cinema to watch a film. Even if the first hour was dreadful, like we might stay seated because we've already paid for the ticket. The book suggests recognizing the sunk costs and making decisions based on future benefits, not past investments. So yeah, there's a lot of situations where you would see the sunk cost fallacy every day. You probably even are a victim of it yourself. So yeah, that's one of the most prominent kind of biases in this book. Is the sunk cost fallacy, and probably the one of the most relatable, especially if you're kind of involved in investments or into decision making every day, or you're kind of just busy, or you're kind of a go getter. If you like make these decisions and they don't work out, you're kind of stuck in this bias where you basically are just going to keep kicking the can in the road till it works, even though you may have made a more progressive kind of move if you just like left that path and walked in a different one. So yeah, that's the sunk cost fallacy. That is chapter, I think, in the book. Sorry, I have the book here. It is chapter It is chapter 14. Yeah, so yeah, that's the sunk cost fallacy. So it's pretty early into the book, and yeah, sorry, it's chapter number 5. But yeah, it's sunk cost fallacy. It's like page like 17 into it. I definitely would recommend, like, even because the book is 100 pages, but it's 100 chapters. Or sorry, it's book 300 pages, but it's 100 chapters. But each chapter is like 2 or 3 pages. So even if you want to do like one chapter a day kind of thing, and really digest kind of what the author is saying. But yeah, the other one I have here is the availability bias. So we tend to judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to our mind. So, for instance, if you hear a news story about a plane crash, you might become more afraid of flying, even though statistically, car accidents are far more common. So the author suggests actively seeking out contrasting information to avoid letting availability bias distort your judgment. And then he follows on and talks about the confirmation bias, which again is probably very familiar to you once I explain what it is. But this bias describes our tendency to favour information that confirms our existing beliefs and disregard information that contradicts them. I'll get it right eventually. But for example, a sports fan might only pay attention to news articles that praise their favourite team, but the book recommends actively seeking out opposing viewpoints and challenging your own assumptions. The framing effect is the way information is presented can significantly influence our choices. So, for instance, you might be more likely to choose a surgery with 90% success rate than one with 10% mortality rate, even though they represent the same outcome. The author suggests that being like, if you're more aware of how framing can influence your decisions and trying to reframe choices in a more objective light. Another bias I have down is the overconfidence bias. So we tend to overestimate our own knowledge and abilities, which can in turn lead to poor decision making and missed opportunities for learning. And basically, this book suggests that recognizing our limits of our knowledge and we should seek feedback from others. And there's a few examples of the many kind of biases like explored. Like I'm gonna get into more of this. Like I have like 4 down already. I think I'll talk about a few more that kind of really stood out to me. But basically, by understanding these biases and how they can support our thinking, we can make more rational decisions. Avoiding common pitfalls and ultimately improving the quality of our lives. So another one I have down here is the anchoring bias. So our initial impressions can be outsized or can have an outsized influence on our subsequent judgments. This is known as an anchoring bias. So imagine, for example, you're at a fancy antique store or jewelry store, and the first item you see is a hefty price tag of €1,000 or 10,000 euro or 100,000, whatever the price may be. Everything else in the store might suddenly seem like a bargain. But even if the prices are objectively reasonable, the author suggests that being aware of the initial anchor, aka the first piece of information you receive, and consciously evaluating each piece of information on its own merit. Another bias that I have written down here or highlighted is the planning fallacy. So this fallacy essentially talks about how we tend to underestimate the time and resources required to complete tasks. This is the planning fallacy in action. So imagine planning a home renovation project and you might envision it taking a few weeks, but realistically it could drag on for months due to unforeseen delays. So the author suggests padding your time estimates and being flexible when faced with unexpected challenges. And another one I have here is the social proof bias. So essentially this is another one that we definitely run into more often than not. So we are influenced by the actions and opinions of others, especially those that we perceive as similar to ourselves or experts in a particular field. So this is the social proof bias at play. So an example of this would be you'd be more likely to try a new restaurant if you see it's glowing, has very high reviews for many people, compared to a restaurant that has like 3 reviews that are all 5-star, compared to a restaurant that has 500 reviews and it's rated 4.6, 4.7, which makes sense because I probably would be the same even if I was like booking a hotel or going to a restaurant myself look for something. I would look for the one with the most reviews. So what the author, I am guilty of this, so I'm not one in a million here, but The author does suggest critically evaluating the source of social proof and not blindly following the crowd. And another bias that he discusses is the hindsight bias. So what is the hindsight bias? The hindsight bias refers to our tendency to look back on events and believe they're inevitable, even though we couldn't predict them at the time. Like, for example, say if my friend won, 70 grand, and you might think, oh, I knew they were lucky. The author argues that hindsight bias makes us overestimate our predictive abilities and discourages us from learning from past experiences. So the book suggests acknowledging that the future is inherently uncertain and focusing on making the best decisions with the information available at the time. The outcome bias, so that is where we often judge the quality of a decision based on its outcome rather than the decision making process itself. So imagine a doctor making a risky surgery that ends up saving the patient's life, but in hindsight the decision might seem brilliant, but even though there was a significant chance of failure. The book emphasizes the importance of evaluating decisions based on the reasoning behind them and not just the final result. And I'm near the end of this. I'm going to talk about two more and then I'm going to wrap it up because I've been talking for over 16 minutes. But don't worry, if you're still here, thank you very much. But yeah, the curse of knowledge is another one. So this is like the 10 most. See, there is 100 chapters, so there's maybe 10 or 11 I might have listed off here, but there is way more. I'm not saying the other ones are bad, but these are the ones that kind of stood out to me. But the curse of knowledge is another bias or cognitive measure, sorry. But basically this book says that once we learn something, it can be difficult to imagine what it's like not to know it. So this is the curse of knowledge in action. So for example, a teacher who knows complex maths, like math concepts, might struggle to explain to beginners in a clear and understandable way, which makes sense. So say if you are a sports instructor and you're used to teaching the elite, trying to teach a beginner might be a bit more difficult for the beginner and yourself because you're so used to knowing the hard stuff where you kind of forget the easy stuff. So the author suggests actually try to see things from the perspective of others, especially when communicating complex information. And the last one that I've marked down here is called the availability cascade. So this is a bias that describes how rumors of information can be spread rapidly, especially when they trigger emotional responses, such as when social media platforms can amplify the availability cascade as people share content that confirms their existing beliefs regardless of its accuracy. And the author suggests being critical of information you encounter online and verifying its credibility before sharing it further. And then a final verdict to this book is the book is very thought-provoking and empowering, and it's a very empowering read that shines a light on the many ways our thinking goes astray. By exploring a wide range of cognitive biases, the book basically equips readers with the tools they need to become more mindful and rational. And like I said, the strengths lie in its engaged writing, its advice, its wide range of biases and entertaining examples. And I definitely would see it as a good read for anyone who wants to improve decision making and achieve a greater sense of clarity in their thinking. And yeah, also a book that will challenge your thinking as well and make you consider the world in new ways and again equip you with tools for better decision making. I definitely would. I'd rate this pretty high. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. And I bought this book for €5 a few years ago. I think I bought it about 3 years ago and I got around to reading it this year. It's about 3 or 4 years ago I bought this book, but I only got around to reading it. Yeah. So the book is about 11 years old, but the book itself does still hold true today. It's still, the advice that he gives is not outdated or anything like that. So yeah, that is it from me. Again, if I don't really get a whole lot of engagement or listeners, but anyone does listen to the end, feel free to leave a comment or message me about anything at all. Everything's in the bio. Check out my Instagram, YouTube. I know I'm doing all the plug things, but I'm not going to push it too much. But yeah, if you enjoyed the episode, stay tuned. I will have one up hopefully by the end of the week or the start of next week. But yeah, thank you very much. Have a good day and take care.